Interest is everywhere. If you want to mortgage a house, buy a new car, or even take out a student loan, interest will pop up somewhere along the line. Interest is often unavoidable, and for the most part, it sucks. But what exactly is interest, and where did it come from? Why do we pay it, and how did it become such a big part of our system? To put it simply, interest is the cost of borrowing money or the reward for saving it. For example, let's say I got a loan from the bank for $100, and then I paid back the bank $110. That extra $10 is interest. And the same goes for the opposite transaction. If I give the bank $100 for a savings account and they give me back $110, that $10 is still interest. In this case, I'm receiving rather than giving. In theory, interest is great. It encourages people to save and get a return on money that would have otherwise been lying around and collecting dust. It also allows people who may not have money at the moment to be able to take out a loan and use it for investments or everyday needs. And of course, no one wants to give out their money for free. So interest compensates lenders for the risks they take when lending money. However, in practice, interest can be problematic and often unfair. So how did interest begin? And why is it so widespread today? In order to answer these questions, we have to go way back in time. Like real far back to around 3000 BCE in the Mesopotamia era. Located in today's Middle East, ancient Mesopotamia was home to many different groups, including Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and Persians. Before conventional money was widely used, these ancient people used foods as ways to pay for their debts. Farmers would borrow seeds and then repay their debts in the spring season with the crops they grew. Most of these ancient examples of borrowing and lending money can be found in the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the earliest and most complete written legal codes, published by the Babylonian king Hammurabi around 1754 BCE. While its laws mainly focused on topics including crime, family relations, and trade, it also had many laws concerning borrowing and trading. The Code of Hammurabi was the first to declare a quote-unquote maximum interest rate, which was set to be 33%. This meant that if a farmer were to borrow seeds to plant, the lender could at most take 33% of the harvest in the spring. There were also rules set in place for the cases in which the borrower couldn't pay back the loan. Take a look at the 48th Law of Code. If anyone owe a debt for a loan, and a storm prostrates the grain, or the harvest fail, or the grain does not grow for a lack of water, in that year, he need not give his creditor any grain. He washes the debt tablet in water and pays no rent for this year. You can see that Babylonians were pretty reasonable. If the harvest was ruined by a lack of water or for some other reason, the borrower wouldn't need to pay his debt, and he could just wash his debt tablet clean. The same isn't true today. If you take out a loan for a business and that business fails, you're not allowed to just wash your debt tablet in water. You still need to pay off the loan. That's the risk associated with doing business today. But ancient laws weren't always sunshine and rainbows. If you weren't able to pay off your debt for any reason other than the one stated above, the laws were much more severe and strict. Take a look at the 117th Law of Code. If anyone failed to meet a claim for a debt and sell himself, his wife, his son, and daughter for money or give them away to forced labor, they shall work for 3 years in the house of the man who bought them, or the proprietor, and in the 4th year they should be set free. In ancient times, it was common to use your wife or child as collateral to set debts. They would work for the lender for 3 years until the debt was paid off. People did what they had to do back then. Fortunately, today there are many ways to get support, even when paying off debt seems impossible. But Mesopotamia wasn't the only ancient civilization to utilize the concept of interest. A little west of Mesopotamia, in ancient Greece, lending had become a common practice. The concept of interest was generally accepted in ancient Greece as it seemed reasonable for a lender who risked his money to receive a profit in return. In society, lenders were respected because they were willing to risk their money to encourage trade and boost the economy. Interest rates were a lot lower in ancient Greece than in Mesopotamia. The general limit was 12%, as compared to the interest rate of 33% in Mesopotamia. Today, interest is a widely accepted practice in society. However, this hasn't always been the case. For many centuries, religious doctrines strongly condemned the lending of money at interest. In fact, even today, many religions continue to oppose the practice of charging interest. Religion has always had a complicated relationship with interest. In Judaism, the Old Testament has a pretty clear stance against interest, or nishuk, which literally means to bite. Imagine interest as a snake bite. It doesn't hurt as much at first, but later, the venom spreads. Jews were prohibited from charging interest to other Jews. However, they could still charge interest to non-Jews, which gave them a competitive edge in medieval Europe when Christians were forbidden from lending with interest. This was actually one of the reasons why Christians began to question the usury laws. Why would God allow one group to take interest from others, but prohibit another group from doing so? And so Saint Jerome, an early Christian priest, came up with the idea that Christians, like the Jews, could charge interest to their enemies. However, Saint Jerome and the early Christian priests were still strictly against charging interest on the common people. They believed charging interest was against the core principles of the faith. The Council of Nicaea in the year 325 AD even banned clerics from charging interest. Later, this prohibition extended to all Christians. However, this did not stop all Christians from profiting off of loans. Many Christians began lending in one currency and taking back in a different currency. They could earn the difference between currency values, which was not illegal. This was their way of charging quote-unquote interest. Of all three monotheistic religions, Islam is the most strict when it comes to interest or riba. The Quran clearly prohibits it, viewing it as exploitive. This ban is strict and comprehensive, leaving little room for reinterpretation. As a result, many modern Islamic banking systems have developed ways to finance without traditional interest, often using profit-sharing models. It's not just religion that was against the concept of interest. Many Greek philosophers, like Plato or Aristotle, had their own takes. Plato condemned interest outright in his work, The Laws, arguing it caused inequality and immorality. Aristotle, on the other hand, saw money as a means of exchange, not something that should breed more money. He famously compared it to trying to get an egg from an infertile chicken. Good luck with that. Despite these philosophical objections, interest continued to be a part of financial systems, even in ancient Rome. Roman thinkers like Seneca and Cato condemned usurers, comparing them to murderers. Yet interest was actively charged, and temples like the Temple of Saturn played crucial roles in lending money. So you might be wondering, if there was so much opposition on interest, how did it still manage to become such an integral part of society? To answer that question, let's travel back in time once again to the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, we find that religious opposition to interest was still strong. Jacques de Vitry, a 13th century theologian, famously said, "God created three types of men, peasants and other laborers, to assure the subsistence of the others, knights to defend them, and clerics to govern them. But the devil created a fourth group, the usurers. This sentiment was widespread, and usurers were often viewed with suspicion and contempt." However, the Renaissance brought a shift in thinking. John Calvin, a major figure in Christianity, began to distinguish between reasonable interest and usury, the latter being excessive interest. Calvin argued that interest could be moral if it was charged in a fair and just manner. He argued that if one takes a loan with interest to help others or to get additional capital for their business, it is moral. The lender is not committing a sin here. But if the purpose of charging is merely to earn profits, it is immoral. Additionally, he stated that no one should charge interest to a poor man or to a person who's in urgent need. Such views started to make the people and the church gradually accept the idea of charging interest. This opened the door for more widespread acceptance of interest in society. Then came the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Around this time, secularism began to rise. Religious arguments against interest didn't really mean much to people because, well, they weren't concerned with religion, and so it became easier for economic thinkers to pose arguments in the favor of interest. Economic thinkers like Adam Smith and Jeremy Bentham started to view interest as a necessary part of growing economy. They believed that interest was just a rent paid for using someone's money. Bentham even wrote a book, A Defense of Usury, arguing that interest was essential for innovation and economic growth. By the 19th and 20th centuries, the debate was less about whether interest should exist and more about how it should be regulated. Economists like Turgot and Keynes provide various theories on why interest was important, from rewarding savings to balancing liquidity. Despite all these changes, there were still groups that viewed interest as exploitative. Karl Marx, for instance, saw it as a tool of the capitalist class to exploit workers. His influence added a layer of ethical debate to the economic discussions of the time. However, by this time, interest had already made its way into society, and most arguments against it were less about religion and more about ethics. Today, most people see interest as a standard part of the financial system, though debates about its morality and fairness still pop up, especially during economic crises. The history of interest has been shaped by religion, philosophy, and economics. While it's now a cornerstone of modern finance, its journey has been anything but straightforward.